Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to learn how to create a value scale from start to finish. Before I switch to videos of the actual drawing process, I'm just going to go over a couple things. First of all, materials. So for this, you're going to need a ruler, an HB pencil or 2B pencil. So it's a lead pencil, not a mechanical pencil, and a black pen. Any black pen will do. You're also going to need a color pencil of any color of your choice. Just make sure it's not black because we're going to be using a pencil. The other thing I want to point out, I'm going to talk about this at the beginning of the video, there are 3 different ways of setting up your grid for your value scale. The first one, which is the most labor intensive but the best practice, is the one where you are measuring different measurements to create basically squares of 1 inch each. The second way, which is a hack, it's making it slightly easier, but it's a little less precise, is to use the width of your ruler, which I'm going to show you how to do. The last one, if you really struggle with it, you can actually use a printable that is linked on Google Classroom under value scale and also in the description of this video. So you can go to the description of the video, click on the link, and it's going to give you this to print out at home. So those are the things to keep in mind. The last thing I want to say is if you're here because you're my student, and there's a 99% chance that you are, keep in mind that you're not necessarily responsible for handing in the entire value scale by the end of this week. So you're going to want to check to see what you're responsible for at any given time and do it at your own pace that way. All right, so keep in mind pacing. And without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so you're going to want to measure. Always make sure that the 0 lines up with your paper and not the edge of the ruler, because that's not going to give you an accurate measurement. So right now I'm measuring 1/4 of an inch on either side of the narrow portion of my paper so that I only have 8 inches left once my border is done. I measure it 3 times to make sure that there are no inaccuracies, and then I just connect my dots, and I have 1/4 of an inch wide row on either end of my paper. Now for the other end, because it's 11 inches wide, I'm going to do 1/2 an inch on either side. So I'm going to measure 1/2 an inch on either side. Again, my 0 always lines up with the edge of my paper, not the edge of the ruler. So I'm going to make my measurement of 1/2 an inch 3 times, and then I'm going to connect it. Now what I'm going to do is erase lines that I don't need, and then I'm going to start creating my boxes. So I'm going to measure and put a little dot after each inch, and I'm going to go ahead and do that 3 times, once towards the top of the paper, once towards the middle, and once towards the bottom. Now you might notice that it feels kind of counterintuitive to measure on one end to basically figure out the measurement on the other, but that's how you ensure to have the proper measurement throughout your row. So now all I'm doing is connecting all 3 dots for each inch increments, and I'm going to go ahead and do that for the whole paper, and then I'm going to do this step all over again from the other side to create boxes instead of rows. So here I go. I'm going to again line up the 0 with the edge of my frame this time as opposed to my paper. I did that actually the last time as well, and I'm just making inch increments, little dots for each number so that I can create boxes that are 1 inch wide. Then I'm going to connect my 3 dots together. I made my measurements in between rows so I could see them. Make sure that you do that, otherwise it can get quite confusing. And there I go. Should go a little bit faster. There we go. And so I'm combining them. Now obviously it's going to take a little bit longer. I sped up this video, but this is basically how you create it, and then you add the numbers at the top only, and you're done. The second way to do it is to actually use the width of your ruler. You just need to make sure that it's perfectly lined up with the edge of your paper. And then you're going to just draw a line across. And then you're going to perfectly line up your ruler with the line that you drew. And then again, you're just going to draw a line across. And this way, your measurement, quote unquote, is the width of your ruler. It's a lot easier to have inaccuracies this way, but it's also a lot faster and easier to do. Just make sure that you line up properly. You're not going to get the nice neat frame that you're going to get from the inch measurements, but it'll do. It's fine. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm lining up my ruler with the edge of the paper, and then I'm lining up my ruler with the line that I drew, making sure that it's nice and neat, and I'm going to create my rows that way. Again, you're not going to get a nice neat frame the way that the inch measurements happen, and you're going to get less rows. Your boxes are going to be larger, but this is completely acceptable. If both of those are too hard, just print it out. Now on to our rows. So we're going to go ahead and write the names of each of the techniques we're going to practice. So we have hatching, cross hatching, stippling, and gradation. you're going to go ahead and just write those with your black pen or your pencil. Anyone is completely acceptable. So those are going to be the ones that we're going to practice, that you absolutely need to practice. Now we're going to add the definitions in the next box. So for hatching, it's diagonal parallel lines. Cross hatching, it's crossing diagonal lines. I made a mistake and added parallel twice, which is wrong. Stippling are small dots and specks, or specks. And gradation are changes through stages and or degrees, and technically that definition applies to every single row of a value scale because that's what we're doing. Now for hatching, I'm creating diagonal lines that are parallel. That means that they're never going to touch. An easy way to do that is to start from one corner of the box to another and then just creating parallel lines on either side. That's what you should do if you really struggle. Otherwise, you can just go from one edge of the box all the way to the end. The key is to have one neat motion with your wrist that goes from one edge of the box to the other edge of the box in one neat row. Do not use a ruler. The whole point is to practice drawing as straight a line as you can with your actual wrist. As you can tell, my lines aren't that straight, but I'm really just practicing the motion of filling up a space with parallel diagonal lines. When we do Inktober or any kind of drawing challenge, you can actually reuse hatching and cross hatching to create shading. These are perfect techniques for using pen. We're using pencil for the first row so that you can see that even if your lines stay nice and light, they can get darker just by adding more lines. You can also erase and fix anything up if necessary. For cross hatching, we're doing the same thing, except we're creating our diagonal lines in both directions. So you're going in one direction and another. I use two different color pens to show you that really you're just creating the same thing just from both sides. I messed up the recording, so I then had to redo the cross hatching on a different sheet of paper. This is a grid box done where the boxes are bigger because I use the width of the ruler. But as you can tell, it's the same thing. So I'm going to do my hatchings in one direction and then in the other, and that makes them cross hatching. So if you want to shade something, you could add hatchings in the larger portion of an object and then use cross hatching on one section to make that part a little bit darker. And that'll create some relief onto whatever it is that you're drawing, which is pretty cool. For stippling, which is drawing with small dots and specks, again, I had issues with my camera, so it didn't record what I thought it recorded, which is kind of a bummer because I really struggled with that flower, and then basically added leaves where there weren't supposed to be any, and I was hoping that you could see that. But with this drawing also that I'm working on right now, it took a lot longer to make it look decent. I tried to add stars and didn't work out. The great thing with stippling is that you're basically drawing with small dots, so if you don't like it, you can always just make that area darker. Or add more dots to make something larger, and it's going to change the way that your drawing looks. A hack or a way to cheat with stippling, if you're really worried, is to use a pencil to do the outline of your drawing, and then you use your pen to add the stippling, the little dots. Definitely don't use a pencil for stippling. It's really impossible. It's really ideal to use a pen. It's really what stippling is best used for. Actually, a lot of tattoo artists do stick and poke, and that's basically similar to this kind of stippling. So you want to start nice and light, and then once you have outlines in dots that you like, you can go ahead and just kind of keep it's tapping your pen against the paper until you have the desired effect. And this is going to go on for a while, but I want to show you this in real time so you can see how long it took me to create this drawing. It goes on and on and on. For these stippling examples, you can really do whatever you want. So I made a slice of pizza, a pear, a happy face, a flower, and then this is like a mini landscape. And right now I'm working on stars that I'm then going to erase because they look terrible. So first I tried to do this shape. I didn't like it. Now I'm trying to turn them into circles. I'm still going to not like that. So then this guy is just going to become super duper dark. Again, all in dots. I'm not filling anything in. And in this case, I'm not creating a nice, neat outline. Now keep in mind that I'm making you do this value scale to practice these techniques or to learn these techniques so that when we create drawings for Inktober and for various other sections of the school year in art, you can go back to these. Now the point is to mix and match. You can use hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, gradation all together, as well as strong outlines or open outlines. But for this particular value scale, we want to isolate each technique to see how well we can master them. Gradation really only works with pencil, color pencil, or paint. It's very difficult. It's virtually impossible to do gradation using a pen. So we're going to be using pencil for that and color pencil. Stippling, hatching, and cross hatching I think look best with pen, but you can do them with pencil, although stippling looks pretty bad with pencil, I have to admit. So again, I'm just going to let this go for a little bit just so you can see how long it takes in real time. And then I'll start talking again once I'm done. If you are sick of watching me try and finish this tiny little landscape, feel free to speed up ahead. Now I'm going to work on a donut, and this time it's I sped up the speed so that it could go a little bit faster. But you can see me kind of work on the outline of the shape. It's going to be too small, so once I'm done kind of creating the icing portion and making certain areas darker so I can see them better, I'm going to go ahead right now and make my donut slightly larger at the bottom, and that's the beauty of stippling. You just add a few dots and your shape is bigger. I always kind of look back and check if I like it, and then if I do, I move on. So over here, I'm working on a slice of pizza. First, I do a very light outline with dots, and then once I actually commit to it, I go ahead and start making certain areas slightly darker. And then little by little, I'm going to add more and more and more layers and make the areas that need more definition darker and darker and darker. So over here, I'm filling in the whole spot, and now I'm realizing, okay, the pepperonis need to be significantly darker in order for us to see them. The contrast needs to be stronger, and then one area of the pizza needs to be slightly darker so that it looks a little bit more 3D. Okay, now for gradation. This is what I do not want to see. Do not smudge with your finger. I know you think that it makes it look better, but really it just makes it look dirty, and it also makes it look completely unprofessional. Also, do not just make one shape lighter and darker just by adding more pressure onto your pencil. It makes it harder to erase, and also it means that we'll really be able to tell the difference between two different shapes. So over here, I know that you can actually make an area darker just by adding more pressure on your pencil. I do not want you doing that. I also do not want you going out of the lines or not filling in the entire box when you are shading. Instead, I want you to practice doing something that's really frustrating but also really helpful down the line. Do not use mechanical pencils. Make sure that you use a 2B pencil for this or an HB pencil. So this is going to take a while. I'm leaving it in real time so that you can see how long it took me to do this. This is not my favorite exercise. It's not going to be your favorite exercise. However, it's really, really important to learn how to do it this way. So what I'm doing is I'm basically coloring in as lightly as I possibly can in the same direction, not just one box at a time, but the entire row. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the entire row with roughly the same shade of pencil. And the goal is to go from light to dark, but the goal is to be able to add by adding layers of pencil instead of adding pressure so that it's easier to erase depending on what kind of paper you're using, and also just so that it's far more professional. I always tell my students and myself, honestly, when you're creating artwork, you want to work in layers, right? You want to start with basic shapes of things, and then you're going to add more and more detail as you go along. That's for drawing. You don't want to, focus on drawing the perfect nose, and then you realize that it's not properly proportioned. Then you have to erase it and do it all over again, for example. For gradation or for shading and detail, it's the same thing with the layers of color pencil that you do as the layers of paint. It's much easier to go darker than it is to go lighter with any art material, whether it be pencil, color pencil, watercolor, gouache, acrylic, you name it. It's easy to go darker. It is sometimes impossible to go lighter. So we want to start nice and light and then make our way towards darker areas. So now that it's nice and even, or mostly evenly the same color throughout, I'm going to go ahead and start making it slightly darker. So now I'm going to go in the opposite direction to kind of get rid of my drawing lines that don't look so neat. And now my box is going to look a lot neater. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for the entire row. Okay. Once I'm done going over the entire row so that everything is relatively neater, I'm going to start making it darker for boxes 3 on. So the first box is going to stay nice and light, and the rest of the boxes are going to get darker. And I want them to be roughly the same shade of darker. okay? Now that my first two boxes are done, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start in my third box, and I'm going to go ahead and make it again one shade darker and go all the way across. And now I'm going to go ahead and make my fourth box darker and go all the way across. And then my fifth. The last few boxes I think are the hardest because it's harder to go darker when you're not adding tons of pressure on your pencil. But again, this is for practice. We're not doing this. I don't expect you to do it exactly this way every single time, but we are practicing how to shade and how to do these techniques in the most professional way possible. And then, you can kind of decide however you want to do it when you're doing a final drawing or drawings for me. Over here, I messed up. This is really difficult to do when you want to then add the proper amounts of layers to either box, but I did a pretty good job. So again, bear with me because I try and do this in real time so you can see how long it really takes. This takes a while, and then you have to basically color in various directions, so in diagonals, straight, across, in order for your pencil and drawing lines to kind of disappear. It's touch and go. You have to kind of keep working on it in order to make it look absolutely perfect or close to perfect. It really is just all about the amount of effort you're willing to put into this assignment as opposed to not. There are ways of kind of cheating this and making it look okay, but it's not the same. This took me a while for a reason, right? It looks different. I can tell when I'm grading how much time you spent trying to make this look as even as possible. I could have spent a lot more time making it look even more even, but I had to, make this video. So I had to eventually just accept it as it was. Always remember to erase the lines that are necessary. With gradation, your fingers are going to get kind of gross, and so is your paper. So you're definitely going to want to erase around your edges to make sure that everything is nice and neat. Here I'm just going back in and kind of evening out the edges, going in one diagonal motion as opposed to another, just to erase anything, or even out, smoothen, that's not a word, smooth out anything that's necessary. Now over here I get to now have fun experimenting with the four techniques that I've learned how to use in the first four rows. So I have a graphite pencil as opposed to a regular lead pencil, and this time I'm going to go from dark to light instead of from light to dark. And right now you can see I went in a horizontal pattern, and then I'm going to go ahead and go in a diagonal pattern to kind of get rid of those edges. Now one of the reasons why I picked this graphite pencil is because it's water soluble and I want to see what happened. I don't expect you to have a graphite pencil at home, but maybe you have watercolor color pencils that you want to test out. So now I'm grabbing a water brush and I'm testing it out. This is something that is optional. Obviously, I don't expect everyone at home to have this handy, but if you do, you can kind of test it out and see what happens. Really, I would have to we'll do this for more of a watercolors lesson, but I would have to water it down more in order to get some of the lighter colors in there. But I had fun doing this on my value scale to kind of just test out what would happen with this graphite pencil. Now for the color pencil section that you really should experiment with because this is super helpful. So for this one, I think I went dark on the edges and light in the center. So I'm going around the edge and kind of making it an even coat. I didn't go too light because I knew I wanted to go relatively dark. And I'm just going to experiment trying to make it go from light to dark from the center of the box to the outside of the box. And so for these color pencils, you can do all different kinds of sections. The goal is to really practice having light coming from different directions and doing this slowly. So as you can tell, I don't think I sped this up at all. Maybe I sped the video up a little bit, but the goal is really to lightly and neatly go from light to dark using your color pencil. Now I'm going to experiment going from light to dark using cross hatching. And so first I just made it kind of light, and now I'm adding a little bit more, and now a little bit more, and I'm going to start adding only in smaller sections of where the cross hatching was, so that I'm going from light to dark just using cross hatchings, right? Hatchings in various directions. And it takes time. Again, this is definitely very time consuming, but it looks cool. And it means that if you're drawing and you don't have a color pencil or pencil handy and you only have a pen, you can still go from light to dark. You're just going to do it differently. And so here I am using stippling to go from light to dark, and it's going to be dark on the corners and then light in the center, like a sphere or a moon or a sun or something. And again, it's time consuming, but it is absolutely possible to go from light to dark in very precise ways using a pen. This is really great news for Inktober, which is going to be super fun, but also for doodling in a notebook when you are bored at various times. Hopefully, this can kind of up your doodle game when you're doing that. The last thing I'm going to do is experiment with light source. So a light source is the direction of where the light is coming from. So a light source could be coming from a window, from a lamp, or anything else. If a light source is very dramatic, it's going to be really easy for you to know how to shade an object. The light is going to hit the object, and that part of the object is going to be super light, and then the opposite edge of that object is going to be super dark because it should be in the shadow if it is not being hit by the light. So now I'm going to create a cone using stippling and using a color pencil, going from light to dark, and then I'm going to actually show with an arrow where the light source is coming from. Always make sure you label what kind of materials you're using. Sometimes I do that also for brands of materials. For the last row, I'm using marker pens and just practicing, trying to see what happens if I play around with color. This is not mandatory. This is just if you want to test out different techniques, different materials that you have. Make sure to erase smudges and lines that you don't need. This just makes your work look much more precise and cleaner. This is an example of a value scale that is finished with experimentation at the bottom. Yours will look somewhat like this when you are done. Can't wait to see what you guys come up with.